past, Clinton County, Missouri was the western edge of the United States. Situated between two emerging cities, Kansas City and St. Joseph, Clinton County benefited from their growth. The Pony Express, the Gold Rush, and Western migration brought people through the county, but the population that settled here put it on the map. Plattsburg became the beef capital of the world. Lathrop was the major supplier of mules for the Boer Wars and World War I. 5 railroads crisscrossed the county, and the nation's first north-south highway ran through Cameron, Plattsburg, and Trimble on its way to Kansas City. Clinton County was home to David Rice Atchison, president for a day, James Harvey Birch, Missouri Supreme Court judge, Willis J. Wynn, president of the Cleveland Federal Reserve, and James Marshall, early leader of the Manhattan Project. Here are more family histories of Clinton County.
Hello, I'm Dorothy Lee Hartel Silvius. I grew up, I was born in 1935 and lived on the farm. I was born on that farm, and it was Ronald and Maud Hartel were my parents. And the farm was always called Maplehurst. I grew up there with my 4 other siblings. When I was a child, I had a lot of responsibilities. Mother and dad being young people, and I was the 3rd child born, so they were pretty well professional at that time. And they knew how to raise a family, and so I had lots of responsibilities. I had helped clean the house, I had to learn to cook, had to hang the clothes on the clothesline, did a lot of jobs like that, and then also a lot of outside and inside jobs. We had responsibilities growing up. Went to an elementary school, it was called Log Church School, and there were probably, maybe 10 students in the school. You learned to concentrate because it was one room and your teacher was teaching all the grades that were necessary. And so while one grade, she was teaching maybe the 1st graders, we were over there in another row, but we were concentrating on what we had to learn. So you learn to concentrate when you go to those little one-room schoolhouses. We carried our own lunch. I walked over a mile to school every day and back, and as did all the kiddos. Went on to, when I got through with the 8th grade, we went to Plattsburg High School and attended there for 4 years, graduating in 1953, and rode a school bus, so that was a big deal to me. But had lots of fun in high school. It was a great time. Had some wonderful teachers that have been a part of my life ever since, in memories now, but they were incredible people. I thought they were old at the time, but I realized in later years that they were young too. But it was a lot of fun. I got to be the editor of the newspaper and do a lot of the school paper, and got to do a lot of things with teachers on the side that were a lot of fun. Played in the sports, did everything I wanted to do, and had a blast. School was fun. Graduated, my other siblings, all 4 of them, all graduated from college. It was an automatic thing, they went to college. But I was the oddball, and I said no, I didn't want to go. And so I went to work, and I worked for W.T. Harbison here in Plattsburg. He was an attorney, well known, and learned a lot from him. Then moved into Kansas City and shared an apartment with my girlfriend who went to high school with me. And we had jobs in Kansas City, and so that was my experience. Now, in between here, when I was a junior in high school, this young man moved into the Plattsburg schools, and that was my husband. And at the time, he was the cutest guy that ever walked. And I fell in love with him immediately, and that was when we were juniors in high school. So we were high school sweethearts. And I'll let him tell you about his lifetime to growing up and where it all took place for him. But that's kind of what, that's the way my life started out. And so I was fortunate to marry George in 1955, and we started our life in Turney on the farm. So I certainly knew what it was like to live on a farm. Okay, it's your turn.
Well, I grew up in Turney, Missouri, lived on a farm, born in St. Joe, but lived on the farm. Had a younger sister, and then a second sister, and then a younger brother. My father got ill when I was a young man, 11. And so he had an illness for 5 or 6 years, and he passed away. So I came up with some responsibilities. My mother had moved the family to Oklahoma City to be near my Aunt Hortense, who is a sister of my father. They lived there for a year, and I lived with my uncle, Beatty Silvius, and for a year. And they moved back and moved to Plattsburg. So I moved to Plattsburg at that time. Went the first 2 years of high school to Lathrop, and then transferred and went to graduated from Plattsburg High School. Dorothy and I got acquainted mainly at First Christian Church in Plattsburg. Played a lot of ping pong together, but she was a cheerleader and drum major and cutest gal and the best dancer in the world, and I couldn't dance at all. So she put up with me, and we got married and moved to the farm at a young age of 19 and went to work. And so we developed a farm operation. I raised eventually about 3,000 hogs a year, had 300 beef cows, kept the calves, made them feeder cattle, and fed them out at feedlot in western Kansas. We bought several adjoining pieces of land, so we now own almost 1,600 acres of land, and it's quite a job. I had a lot of help, mainly my wife. She did utmost to help me in everything, and so we got along just fine, raised our 4 children, whom all went to college. They have their life going now in good shape. We're just getting old together.
Yeah, but it's been a lot of fun, when we were young and living at home with my family. Our fun was so much entertainment at home, in the wintertime we were sledding, we were ice skating, and in the summertime we were picnicking and fishing. We fished a lot. And I grew up with all of that, and that was enough for me. I loved that. All kids love that. You may work at home, but you also play at home, and it was always a gathering. And then as we got married, things change and your kids get involved. But one thing that we always did with ours, we sat down at night, and it was supper on the farm, and had supper together. All 4 kids, Dad and Mom, were all right here at the table, and we chattered about school and all the activities going on, and the scandals that happen at school. It's a big deal, and all of those things are really important. When I started Sunday school at church, I was 2 when I went up those steps at First Christian here at Plattsburg, and I've been going ever since. And so our children all went to school there. George, his church affiliation was
Baptist Church in Turney.
Right, that's what I thought. It was Baptist in Turney, and then when they moved to Plattsburg, he started coming to Christian church too, and so we've always been attending there. I think that's really important to bring out. It's really important in our lives.
Our farm where we live was part of my great-grandfather Williams. That was my grandmother Silvius was a Williams. and that was her father. He ended up owning quite a bit of land in Clinton County. And my grandmother and grandfather, Silvius Williams, she was Williams, he was Silvius, went to the Round Prairie grade school. And my father also went to that school. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and it's on property that we later owned. The house where we moved to was a small home, but in 1925, where my great-grandfather's house was at that point, it burned down, and so they rebuilt the little house that we started in 1927, and they used lumber from that schoolhouse to construct the main dimensional lumber in that house. So we still live in that house. We've built onto it 7 times, I think. So it's enlarged quite a bit, and things have changed over the time. But I also had another great-grandfather that owned a farm 5 miles north of us, and his name was W.A. Silvius. He was in the Civil War, mustered out after the Civil War, mustered out in Leavenworth, Kansas, out of the service, and took a train back to Dandridge, Tennessee, where he lived, where he grew up, and he had a layover in Keystone, Missouri. He rented a horse and rode around through the countryside and liked the country, and so he decided he wanted to move here. So we went home and saved $50 a year for his family and moved here after 10 years. He settled south of Plattsburg, was there for a couple of years, and then purchased the farm where we still own part of that farm at this point. So that's another century farm we have. So that's kind of the history of that.
Well, let's see. One thing that we really have always done a lot of is we're involved with our children that are still close by, but then there are some of them that are not. We have one that's living in Italy right now, so we try to visit them every year. And so that's been a wonderful experience, the traveling and all, but and then we have one now that lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but the other 2 are getting closer here for us, so we kind of like family, and that's a big part of our lives. The Hartel Lakes were a part of my life growing up because it was close. Really the correct name is Clinton County Sportsman's Club, but I always knew it as the Hartel Lakes because it was part of the Hartel land. But that is a big part of a family, is staying connected. So we like that a lot.
Maplehurst.
Yeah, I told him about
Yeah.
Maplehurst.
Well, that's the center of Clinton County.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Up
It
there.
is. So anyway, and I'd always come up with bright ideas when I'm out mowing the yard when I was in my younger day. And I'd suggest to George, you know what we need to do? We need to add on. We've got 4 children, and we've got a little house. And so we just would go for one. It seemed like we get a few little years. George is one of these kind of guys that if you don't have the money, you don't buy. You wait until you have the money, and then. So we did it gradually, and it worked. And we survived all of that. But it was a lot of fun in the process, and he's always maintained that. The only thing with George was he always wanted to own the land that was next to our land. So it kind of grew. But, we worked hard.
That's a thing of a farmer. He always wants to.
Yeah,
own the
that's
land.
always been a joke. But, when our kids when the younger ones got to high school age, that's when I got to jump in and be a part of George's business, and it was great. It was busy at the time, I was overwhelmed, but I learned an awful lot, and that's what you got to do is get right into his business and find out what's going on, and you hear about it. And anytime when we borrowed money to run the business, anytime we sold a load of hogs, when that check came in, I was in the car headed to Plattsburg to the loan agency and paying that off. We paid it off as fast as we could. But it's hard to do nowadays compared to what it was then, but it was hard then too.
Well, I kind of had a policy when we did have land come up for sale. We took chances at times, but we never mortgaged anything that we'd already paid for. We just bought that and paid for that before we bought another piece of ground. And that was kind of my policy, our policy. So we didn't get behind as far as debt and so forth. We did have a lot of debt at one time, but that main effort was to pay it off always and not spend foolishly if we could, which we tried to do that way.
Saturday night was a big night. When you live in the country, you go to town on Saturday night, and they buy their groceries, and we got to go to the movies. As I got older and in my teen years, I roller skated a lot here in Plattsburg. They had a roller skating rink that was a blast. We had balloon races. My dad was a great roller skater, and we really had fun with those balloon races. Dad and I could go around that thing. We had a lot of fun. Anyway, so, and another part of our life that's been, and it's continued, is picnics. It's always been a picnic affair. My parents always, they were having a picnic maybe 3 times a week with all their friends out of Plattsburg. There'd be about 3 or 4 other couples, and they'd all get together. They'd just call each other and say, "What do you got in the fridge? Let's go down to the Hartel Lakes and have a picnic." And that was fun, and we were doing that all the time. When our children were in their younger years, we were all involved with 4-H, Head, Heart, Hand, and Health, a program that is very important. I love hearing about it and reading about it. I'm so glad it still continues to this day. It's a very learning process, but at the same time, it's fun. And you can benefit from it in many ways. 4-H, I just can't say enough about how good it is for young people to be involved in, especially the rural children. But then there's others that do get into it too that are not in the country. The movie theater was a drawing card in Plattsburg. Everyone went to the movies on Sunday night. It was a big deal. They had a balcony in it, and gosh, it was just really a big deal. But that was, I never felt like I ever missed out on anything. I never did, and I regretted later in my later years that I didn't go to college. But when you're young and impetuous and you want to do what you want to do and you want to make your own money, and so I learned a lot about Kansas City though at that time, and that was fun. But I was coming back to the farm and growing up there was easy for me to move in with George and have our family.
One thing about it, our house is a half a mile and a half a quarter off of H Highway, and the driveway is that long. It was a mud road when we moved there, when I lived there, and it was a mud road for the first 2 years that Dorothy and I lived there. We couldn't afford to gravel the road. And that was a happy day when the gravel trucks came over the hill. But we lived there like that. I grew up there, of course. Electricity came when I was 6, as 1941. And I remember the electrician workers came and wired the house. And the 2 fellas that wired the house were Dorothy's dad and his brother, which I had no idea what would come later, but it was kind of different. But we did have 4 children, and they've all married and stuff. And now we have 8 grandchildren, and we just had our 7th great-grandchild on Leap Day, 29th. So that's what our family is now.
Right.